Hello everyone, my name is Caleb Pierce, and this is my thesis project on personality and classroom seat selection. I would like to give a special thanks to Dr. Disabato and my lovely fiancée Gloria for all the help that they were able to give in um, this project. Dr. Disabato was very helpful in the analysis and guiding me on the tests, and my lovely fiance Gloria was very helpful with the editing of the paper and all of that. My hypothesis was simple. I'd like to be able to predict someone's personality by where they sit in a classroom. So I had three major articles that were the backbone of my study. The first one, Himari, laid the groundwork for my study. They used Big Five personality inventory and separated a large classroom into three sections, front, middle, and back. It was kind of the predecessor of my thesis, and it laid wonderful groundwork for me, and most importantly, was able to show that when someone answers on a survey where they would like to sit, to a statistically significant degree, that is where they will sit in the classroom. And that was very important for my study. The second was Schule, or Schule, and they were more on C selection correlating with anxiety types. This gave a greater level of precision because they used more selection regions than just the three front, middle, and back of Himari. And they were able to show that some of the types of anxiety even correlate with types of, or aspects of personality. Social and volunteer anxiety had negative correlations with extroversion, and cold call, or being called upon in class, had a positive correlation with agreeableness. The third was Kolisch and Struman. That was all about, that laid the groundwork for the impact of my thesis and the findings of it, because they were able to show that personality predicted the best stress management tools for a person. They showed that handicraft was best for people high in emotionality, or in a Big Five would be called neuroticism. I suspect this has to do with the grounding aspect of that sort of activity. They were able to show that sports were best for people high in conscientiousness and extroversion. I suspect that has to do with the socialization aspect of sports. The sportsmanship goes into the extroversion, and the conscientiousness due to the hard work and dedication and structured routine that comes with sports. They found that singing with friends was best for people high in agreeableness, and video games were best for people low in agreeableness. Interestingly enough, they found that meditation was not best suited for people high in openness, and learning for fun was much better for them. Also, a very interesting note that they found was that extroversion was positively correlated with social media addiction. So these were the three studies that I used to essentially build the foundation of my thesis. I had five novel aspects to my thesis that have not been used in other studies like it. The first one was that I used the Hexaco personality inventory, and any others that I found had only used the Big Five. So I thought the extra The extra dimension of personality would give an interesting look at, at aspects that have never been studied before. The second was using 3 different classroom designs. We'll get into those later, but that was for the sake of generalization, just because you pick a seat in this classroom and you have this personality, does that mean anything for any other classroom types or other classrooms? The third was more selection regions than previous studies. As stated before, the first one had only used 3, and the second that I mentioned had used 9. I have ones as high as 12 selection regions for hopefully a greater level of precision. And the fourth and fifth were using distance to the door as a predictor and using distance to the professor as a predictor. I thought this would give greater generalization as well as a interesting aspect that no one has seemingly looked into before. So my methods, I unfortunately only had 23 participants self-selected from from Sona system from the BW Psych 100 pool. 47% of them, 47.8% were men. They ranged from 18 to 23, most of them being around 18. The materials I used were a survey made by me of 10 images that were all variations of the 3 classroom types you see on screen. I will be referring to them as Classroom 1, Classroom 2, and Classroom 3 as labeled for the remainder of this presentation. After completing the 10 image survey, they then were given a 60 item hexaco personality inventory, and after that they were given demographics questions about their major, their GPA last year, their sex, and their age. So in the results, this is the descriptive statistics of the personalities, the age, and the average distance to door for each person, and average distance to professor for each person. The thing that I found most interesting about this was that the minimum of the distance to the door was greater than the minimum distance to the professor, but the mean distance to the professor was greater than the mean distance to the door, as you can see. I just thought that that was interesting, that the person that was willing to sit closest to the professor was closer than the person most willing to sit closest to the door, and yet, by and large, people wanted to sit farther away from the professor than they did from the door. I thought that was interesting. So, I only was able to find one significant finding, which was using the distance to the door within Classroom 3 to predict a person's level of extroversion, which I was able to find in a statistically significant degree. It was found using a multiple linear regression with Classroom 3A and Classroom 3B, as you can see, as the predictor variables. The R-squared was 0.36, and the p-value was 0.01, so that worked out really well, and I was very happy with that result. From there, I completed 47 more regressions and 30 ANOVAs, and there were no significant findings. However, there were some non-significant trends that I still wanted to report on and found interesting. This is a multidimensional heat map of the classroom. I have 2 more for the other 2 types. Each personality dimension has its own color for its scores, and they are color graded so that the darker the color, the higher the number. Also, the highest average value per region for that personality type is bolded, So honesty down there in region 3-2 is bolded, and extroversion up in 3-1 is bolded because those are the highest for those dimensions. The region names are named off of the X and Y values for those regions. So they are numbered 1 to 3 on the X across left to right, and they are 1 and 2 in the Y direction away from the professor. So region 1-2 has an X value of 1 and a Y value of 2. Anyway, what was found to be statistically insignificant but was supported by previous studies was specifically in classroom 1 and classroom 3. I found that agreeableness tended towards the middle of the classroom. As you can see in region 2-1 and 2-2 have higher agreeableness numbers than on the sides. And the same thing can be found in classroom 3 in region 3-1 and 3-3 have the highest agreeableness values. Now, what was interesting in my study versus the other studies was that agreeableness was in the center on the x-axis in my study, whereas it was found to be the highest in the middle on the y-axis for other studies. This may suggest that agreeableness tends towards the very center of the classroom on both the x and the y axes. But due to my study not finding this statistically significant, I cannot say for certain. Also, it was found that in classroom 1 and classroom 2, extroversion tended the highest in the front of the class, as you can see in regions 2-1 and 3-1 were much higher than in the back of the classroom here. And here in classroom 2, you can see that region 2-1 is higher. And as you go back, the yellow extroversion numbers tend to decrease. And the last one that was found in other studies as well and supported in other studies was in classroom 2. Conscientiousness tended higher towards the middle and the front. As you can see in the orange coloration, conscientiousness is high in the front and begins to decrease towards the back, with one exception being region 2-4 where it spikes. But the smallest numbers tend to be found in the very back of the classroom, regions 2-5, 2-6, and 2-15 specifically. Now on to things that were found by my study but were not supported by other studies. These may potentially be brand new discoveries found in my thesis specifically, or potentially they could be just fun little flukes. I'm not certain due to none of these being statistically significant. But regardless, in classroom 2, it was found that honesty and humility were highest in both the very front and very back, but tended to be lowest in the middle of the classroom. That I found interesting. And it was also found that in classroom 2 as well, emotionality, or in the Big Five would be called neuroticism, tended to be lower in the front and higher in the back, suggesting that students who sit close to the front are have less potentially anxiety or uh, less emotionally unstable. Well, not unstable, but emotionally uh, variant. So, my limitations, I had a very small sample size of 23 participants. It was also an issue of time. I unfortunately did not have enough time to do all of the analysis that I really wanted to do. In order to do the analysis that I did do, I had to write around 700 lines of code in R programming, as well as do my ANOVAs in SPSS. So it was a lot of analysis, a great deal of analysis, and there just was not time to do more. I wanted to do an analysis of the subscales of the hexaco, but there was not time. Even though I coded for it, there just wasn't time to run the analysis and interpret it. I wanted to do more analysis with the demographic questions, but there just wasn't time to complete it. So time was certainly a factor for this analysis. For future research, I recommend any research that wants to replicate or expand upon my study to have a much larger sample size. 100 or more would be wonderful. I recommend they use 4 variations of Classroom 3. I only used 2, and that was based off of something I didn't realize would be an assumption at the time. I had assumed that because of the more circular design to the classroom, that if you moved the door from the top of the page to the bottom, it would simply reflect, that answers would reflect across the y-axis. But that was an assumption I probably shouldn't have made, and I would recommend future studies to use 4 variations instead of only 2. I would also recommend that they add an additional row to Classroom 1 to better test the idea of agreeableness trending towards the center of the classroom on both the x and y axis, because I only had 2 rows of selection areas. So I think that would be something worth looking into. I recommend looking into personality dimension interactions to see if there are trends that are specific to one personality dimension going up and one going down, or of 2 going up at the same time. I was not able to run that sort of analysis, both due to the lack of statistical power of a low sample size and, unfortunately, lack of time. I recommend testing whether sitting in one place in one classroom predicts where you would sit in another classroom. I think that would be very interesting and beneficial for future studies to do that. I also recommend doing the subscale analysis that I was not able to do in the hexaco subscales. I think that would be very useful to not only say something about, let's say, extroversion, but rather say something about sociability or liveliness or something along those lines as well, and be able to give more precision in the analysis. Lastly, I think that doing the test on the implications and the impact of the demographics that I was unable to test would be very useful and helpful in future studies to see, does male or female impact these findings? Does age have any impact? Does major predict any of these things? I think that could be an interesting analysis that to be honest, I would love to run someday, but unfortunately not today. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.